Welcome to Global Corporate Venturing's Next Wave series of webinars. I'm Maya Palmer. This is the webinar on going global, how CVCs can successfully move into new territories. If this is not the webinar that you were expecting to join, forget about the one that you were going to join because this is going to be better. I always make that joke, but it's especially true, I think, today because we have a really good panel of people who have not only are successful CVCs, but they've all gone global very early on and all in slightly different ways. So I think it's going to be an interesting one to hear about all the different models you can use. So yes, how CVCs can successfully expand into new markets. And I think we're gonna, so this is the panel that we have today. So yes, I'm Maya Palmer. I'm editor of Global Corporate Venturing, and we, as part of our editorial coverage, put together these next wave webinars approximately once a month, covering both topical investment areas, but also always quite often talking about practical ways of being a good CVC investor. And the going global topic is one that's really pertinent to almost any CVC investor fairly early on in their journey because innovation is everywhere. And CVC teams tend to be quite lean, but have to cover a lot of ground. And we couldn't have picked, I think, a better panel, really, because so if I can introduce in no particular order, but Nicola Bates from Aerospace Accelerated, which is part of Boeing. Nicolas Sauvage, who's president of TDK Ventures, the investment arm of Japanese electronics group TDK. Kendra Rauschenberger, who's the general partner of Siemens Energy Ventures, so again, part of Siemens. And Dong-Soo Kim, who is CEO of LG Technology Ventures. I'll let them introduce themselves in a little bit more detail, but each one of these cases has been very different in terms of Nicola and Dong-Soo both working for Asian companies who have established a CVC presence in Silicon Valley very early on. Nicola Bates kind of has gone the other way in terms of working for a US company, but based in the UK. Kendra is at a German company and in Germany, but has, I think, one of the most impressive geographical spreads of her investment team, covering areas like, everything from Israel, Nigeria, Mexico City, a couple of different locations in the US, and I could go on. So everyone has done this in a slightly different way. Nicola, of course, is quite notable. He's been opening offices with frequency in the past 2 years in London and in Bangalore. So there's a lot to talk about. Now, I just wanted to sort of just preface this. I mean, we see the need to go global very clearly when these are just some statistics from our World of Corporate Venturing report where we survey corporate investment units globally, and you sort of see that investors are usually grouped in, the big three areas. They tend to be in Europe, the US, growing presence of CVCs in Latin America and in Asia, but they, particularly in places like Japan and Korea, we've seen really rapid growth. But when you look at where they're investing, those geographies are far more geographically spread. And then the other thing that I would just say, one of the reasons we wanted to pick this topic at this point is really, which we have seen, I think, a bit of an acceleration of this. It's always been a very well-trodden path for CVCs to go, say, probably in the last decade, there was a big movement of Asian companies to go to Silicon Valley. We've seen US companies opening in Europe. And then recently, we've seen this wave of everyone becoming very interested in opening offices in India, which has become a big focus. So that was really to set up the session. I'm going to stop sharing these slides and get the discussion going because that will get us into the heart of this. But anyway, let me introduce the panel now. So Dong-Soo, Kendra, Nicola, and Nick. I'm going to distinguish between Nicola and Nicola by calling Nicola Bates Nick. It would be great if we could start by you kind of all giving us a brief overview of how you do this global piece of your work. And so again, maybe starting with, I don't know, I'll start with you, Nicolas Sauvage. If you could tell us how, why did you want to expand quite quickly into other geographies? You're already not in the same geography as your parent company, but you've opened in London and Bangalore recently. And yeah, if you can sort of tell us a little bit about kind of the thinking behind that, that would be useful.
Uh, it's interesting when you say it so quickly because I feel like we have been as slow as we can be, and so it's always for us a case of it has to be compelling enough or a key pain point for us to consider a new office. So if we can avoid having a new team and building it somewhere, then of course we would prefer, for example, to leverage local teams or local partners. So it has to have that significant threshold or enough ROI. But if I talk about the last two offices we opened, one is Bangalore, and here it was really driven by one, there's a clear strategic intent for TDK, who has been there for decades, to do more in India and to leverage a lot of the innovation that's happening in in India. And we based our office in Bangalore because there is a lot in deep tech also concentrated in Bangalore. And we feel like the why now is very, very strong for entrepreneurs to be successful in India and then going global, at which point our superpower as a corporate VC to help the startups go global could be very strong. London was very different. It was part of us raising our first multi-LP fund on decarbonization, which we call Fund EX1, where if we think about climate tech, number one place on AUM, number of funds and investors is San Francisco, number two, Boston, but number three global is London. And so it made a lot of sense for us to start there for a decarbonization fund. And so that's how we thought about it. It's really about where does it make sense for TDK wanting to do more in India and wanting to do more in decarbonization, especially on energy generation and energy storage, and where it made sense as a VC to invest and to have a good footprint all around.
Yeah. Okay. And it would be great we can maybe dig into this piece about where, how you draw the line between where what you can cover, remotely and then where you need a local presence. But I'd love to bring a few of the others into this initial piece. So maybe going to you next, Dongsu, we're quite early in terms of establishing, a CVC unit, and is very much about bringing, a presence for LG in Silicon Valley. So, but what was the kind of thinking around it, and how have you sort of evolved it really in the years since?
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, we started in 2018, and before LG was investing out of the balance sheet of each companies, and it wasn't working too well, obviously, obviously investing out of balance sheet has its own challenges, all that, but also because a lot of the teams were in Korea and they were having a lot of problems investing in here in Silicon Valley, where the largest volume is, at least in the venture capital world. So when I was brought in to set it up and run it, which was a quite unique experience, but yeah, I obviously everybody, including myself, thought just setting up the headquarters here in Silicon Valley made most sense, just because this is the center of venture capital world, right? And early on though, we were determined to invest worldwide, not just here, but we've been very I guess measured in terms of trying to open other offices. I mean, right now we are just all based here, mainly because for many reasons. Obviously, there's most volume here, but also LG has many tech scouting offices throughout the world, which helps us to source deals. So deal sourcing was not such a big challenge, but now that almost 7 years down, we have quite a number of portfolios all over that. Portfolio management is becoming actually more difficult because obviously the tech scouting offices are structured to manage portfolio, right? So right now we're getting to a stage where we're thinking about opening other offices, but that's here where we are.
Okay, well, so watch this space, but actually maybe something to discuss there about that, again, that tipping point to what leads to a decision maybe to open an office. Okay, well, carrying on, coming to you, Nick, next, you're again, you're based yourself in Northern Ireland, but you work very closely with, a team that's spread in a number of places. Was that right?
Yeah. So the team are based in the US, in London, in Amsterdam, in Dubai, and in Shanghai. So quite a wide global coverage. But really thinking about the why for us, I started out, with my team doing that early stage investing when at the time we had that larger fund that was based in the US. And really, it has kind of grown here from the UK further out and back to the US. And I think for us, as we've thought about those other places, it has been very linked to Boeing's strategic intent. So thinking about, and I just heard an updated stat yesterday, which was that 78% of our commercial backlog is outside the United States. So when you think about it in that way, our customer is outside the US. So we've really been thinking about how do we get closer to our customer, and how do we help solve some of the challenges that they have right at that front end. So I think that's where it's important for us to be thinking about where those priority markets are through that lens, not just where is the good, quality startups based. We got to marry those two things together.
Okay, so there was a definite sort of acknowledged commercial need, I guess, to kind of make sure that this team is very, and you're looking particularly at quite early stage.
Very early,
yeah.
Yeah. We're very early stage, which I think is even more important that we're close, because they need a lot of support and a lot of hand holding at those early stages, and just being more visible, getting that, that huge pipeline in the first instance.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and again, you're someone you can kind of, again, with Boeing having a presence quite internationally, that's something that you piggyback onto and to some extent, right, with your team. But
yeah, it's massively important to us. So we built what we call the Boeing Champions Network, which is there's 120 individuals across the company, based all across the world, that work with us day and daily, supporting the portfolio, scouting, helping us with technical due diligence, all of that really important work that needs to happen, and it's not concentrated in one place, which I think just actually helps us with better decision making, because we're getting lots of different perspectives as we're going through that down selection process.
Okay. All right, so a lot of good whys to the why question. And Kendra, last but not least, I mean, I think, this whole thing of using a kind of quite global network from the parent company is one that's pretty familiar to you as well, as I understand it.
Yeah, so I think it would probably help to go back to how we were funded or founded as a ventures organization. So in 2020, Siemens Energy was carved out of Siemens AG. So Siemens Energy is its own stock listed company. And at the time, obviously, the board had the question, what do we do now with startups? And basically, in 2020, we have then stood up a small team from existing people across the company that were handpicked to kind of form this seed of the ventures team. And that basically brought together people that were already in certain places, because we looked at what are the right profiles as opposed to where do they sit to get us started. So that's why I think we were born quite diverse with our geography. But then also when you think about how we then further build out the team, when we recruited new team members, we did then look at where do we have a good location where there is obviously a startup ecosystem that's either existing or is emerging. But also, to your point, leveraging our organizational structure. So Siemens Energy is operating in 6 regions. So it helps me and the team obviously to be close to the regions, because they are the finger on the pulse to our customers, but also having a kind of a stronger presence for us in Germany, being a German headquartered company, helped for us to also stay very closely aligned with our business areas, who are mainly centered in Europe. But today we are operating from Germany. We have London, we have Austin, Texas, and Orlando in the US. We have Mexico. We have somebody in Dubai and in Africa, and then also in Shanghai. And it seems a bit kind of dispersed, but really what it helps us is to leverage the network that we have within the company, but then also to build those satellites for the ecosystems that matter to us externally quite well. And I have to say, it doesn't come without challenges, right? So if you have a team that spans across the whole world from a time zone perspective, you need to be creative on how you actually then work well together, because sometimes you have like 1 or 2 or 3 hours where the full team actually has team time possibility. So that's something that I think we haven't fully cracked the nut yet, but we were also born at the beginning of COVID, so we are not used to actually being together in an office at all. And so from day one, we had this, I guess, challenge on how do we build a team, and how do we build ecosystem, and how do we build relationships with just being where we were. And yeah, so that's a bit of our background story, why we look like we do.
I think there were lots of people violently nodding when you were talking about the kind of challenges of managing a remote team. But I wanted to also just, throw that question maybe a little bit wider, and to ask, each of you really what have been some of the main kind of pain points that have come from being, expanding internationally, and especially in that situation where you're going into a completely new market, really, where maybe you're making sort of one of the first investments, or opening an office and really wanting to become a bit more embedded into there. And I would maybe come back to you, Nicola, now, because just if you've the experience of, say, going into an ecosystem like Bangalore. I mean, was there anything about that was particularly kind of tricky that you had to overcome?
I think, well, first, we never had a filter about needing people locally in a geography to invest. Our first investment was Starship in Estonia. So I think we never thought that we needed a local team to be able to invest. We invested in Germany, for example, which we could talk about that, the challenges of investing in Germany, but we don't have a team in Germany. So I think the rationales for us to have a local team is when we really think that the geography has a very strong why now and a very strong strategic proposition, which deserves to have a local team. And here, maybe it's my bias. I can see that in the panel, we don't all share that bias, but I do want to have a critical mass team size in each of the offices. And I think a good critical mass is probably 3, but maybe even better 4 people. And the intention is to create a camaraderie, a support between the team, so that they're not feeling like too remote and too alone, and they can actually engage locally as a team. So I have that little bias, which probably is back to what I was saying about it has to have a good enough ROI, a strong threshold before I even decide to create an office. For Bangalore, it was really challenging, because if I could choose, I would prefer to have someone who has been in the team for a while, relocating, and then being able to build the team locally. That's what we've done in London, by the way. We had Mark relocated from our San Jose office to London, and then we built a team thanks to Mark locally, helping with onboarding. Bangalore, we didn't have that luxury, and that proved to be, of course, more difficult. But we chose someone who was quite good at being in the CVC before, and understanding how to connect with both the VC ecosystem, the startup ecosystem, and the mothership. And I think when we're talking about creating a new office in a new location with someone who doesn't come from either the mothership or the CVC team, I think it comes with more challenges. And I think it's really about finding the right person who can really understand what CVC is about. So yeah, that would be the biggest challenge I would highlight: recruitment.
Okay. And actually I'd love to ping this back to you, Kendra, because you've taken such a different approach where you do, I mean, Nicolas talked about creating these kind of pods, of several people with the critical mass, but you have some people who are sort of operating, as sort of solo and that kind of thing. Again, so how do they sort of, I guess, overcome that challenge of maybe being a little isolated, or and also I'm just curious as to how you picked them. Were they already people who were quite embedded into their local ecosystems, and that's why they were just such a good choice for joining your team, or did they come internally, or what was the process?
Yeah, so I think the luxury that we do have as being a ventures team for Siemens Energy is that we are operating in more than 90 countries as the parent company. And we have more than 100,000 people. So nobody in my team is being kind of isolated from there's no local office or other colleagues from the business that actually they can sit with and become part of the local team, right? It's one person that is ventures in a group of business related people. So that probably is maybe a little bit of what you can say isolated in a country because you're the only investor or the only ventures person. But at the same time, I think when you think about what we try to do, which is we are a very strategic investor, so we want to take investments that are actually aligning with the business. And we also do more than investments. So we also have a piloting track where we basically really work with the business to identify their problems and then scout startups that can help solve those problems is actually quite beneficial for the people to sit a little bit more dispersed with people in the business, because then you have the finger on the pulse, what actually really is important to the business side, so that we stay strategically aligned. With regards to recruiting, I think it really depends on the roles. So we have brought in people externally from the VC world on our investment team to kind of, level up our investment experience and ability to make good deals. And here we have then specifically looked at also location, right? So we just onboarded, for example, a new investment manager in London. We wanted somebody in London. To Nicolas' point, it's a very important climate tech ecosystem that we are building. So for new hires, we've been quite selective on location. But I also have to say, when you think about, for example, our piloting program, it actually is really beneficial to get people from inside the company moving into those roles, because they know the business, they know the customers, they know the problems, they have the network to actually then go and make things move when you want to pilot and adopt the solution. So that's also been part of our strategy. For some roles, we actually love to recruit internally because it's much more impactful and people kind of can kick the tires from day one. Whereas when you bring in somebody new into those types of roles, it probably takes a good year for them to build the network and the business understanding. So it's just a different way, I think, of looking at what do you need at this point in time.
So it sounds like there's no one answer, but it's kind of, so it's a little bit opportunistic based on kind of what that need is. Interesting that London's becoming the go-to place for climate tech investment. You've both kind of highlighted that. One area I wanted to touch on, to put you on the spot, Dong-Soo, but I think, we were talking a little bit in our prep call about, sometimes some geographies can surprise you. And I think you had kind of mentioned that there were some areas that, had been kind of maybe surprisingly difficult to kind of move into with investments.
Sure. I mean, I think obviously different geography pose different challenges, but I think you can categorize those challenges into two buckets. One is just more geopolitical or just moving, currency restrictions and things like that, that just makes it a lot harder to invest in certain places. I mean, China comes into mind. And I mean, if you're going to invest in RMB, then you have to have certain kind of structure to allow that. And us being a USD, based in the US fund, it just makes it that much harder. So, but those things aside, I think there's also certain cultural differences on how startups view working with big companies and also investors and so forth. Obviously, there are certain geographies where startups are more hesitant about working with larger companies. They're afraid of big company taking their technology or creating or investing with all sorts of different strings attached and all that. So that's again, you have to do a lot of convincing that, you know, not every CVC is the same, and then there are certain CVCs that are more structured and to look out for their interest and then create really a kind of win-win type of relationship instead of trying to take advantage of a startup. So that's one. But I mean, I think there are also, you know, even just investing, there are certain geographies which pose certain challenges. I think, you know, some place like Germany, I have had very tough experience. I don't want to name out a single country, but Germany, Austria, the way the startups negotiate is quite different. They are very careful not to disclose too much to the big companies. They are also very guarded in terms of their valuation. If you drive them too hard, then they can sometimes get offended, and then you won't hear from them, which makes it kind of hard to negotiate because, you know, when you're negotiating, you always want to, you know, push really hard to get the best deal possible, but sometimes you just have to be very careful. And then there are other geographies like Israel where people are very upfront and open, but also very aggressive, and you just have to understand that that's how these people negotiate. So usually it's you that who should be very careful of not to get offended the way how aggressive they are. So.
Yeah, and of course, you know, I mean, to not offend any particular culture, we're not saying this is good or bad. They're just these cultural differences.
Yeah.
How do you kind of, I mean, how have you overcome that, or how have you kind of learned? I mean, when you go into maybe a country where you haven't perhaps invested before, are you usually co-investing with someone? Is there someone that kind of, you know, acts as that kind of guide in for the first time?
Yeah, so one is taking advantage of your local offices. I mean, they understand the particular culture, and they can help you on their and on that region's business practices and culture. But also, we always like to invest with a local VC because they obviously have a very good knowledge of that particular market, and as also they can do a lot better job in filtering some of the startups and also managing those startups after the investment. So I think that's something that we certainly look into when we try to invest in a new market.
Yeah. Okay. No, it sounds like that's kind of the an overall theme of sort of leaning into the local knowledge and also co-investor networks. There's quite a lot of questions coming in the Q&A channel, so thank you everyone for that. A lot of these seem, you know, there's a lot of interest actually just in kind of the fundamental setup of you know, CVC units and so on. And I'm not sure that we're necessarily going to be able to go into all the nitty-gritty about that, but I think there was there's some interest, Nick, about the, you know, the Boeing program, and you know, there's a question about how you set up that kind of champions program. So I wonder, you know, maybe if you could tell us a little bit about that, especially if that kind of again spans you know, globally and is something that does help you be quite international in your approach.
Yeah. So for us, what we actually did was it was a way for us to really double down on getting in that technical expertise that we needed into the portfolio. And for us, there was also the danger of that, which was we didn't want to just let loose our Boeing engineers on our startups. So because we were very concerned about, you know, them just getting their time wasted. Also, all of those fears, like, you know, Dongsu mentioned about IP, and, you know, we wanted to be very, very careful in terms of how we did that. So we actually put together, you know, an effective training program for our internal, what we call Boeing champions. And we insisted that before they were allowed to talk to our startups or engage with them, they had to go through this program. And it actually became a bit of a badge of honor, you know, that they were about, you know, an aerospace accelerated champion, and that they got to be part of the process. And because we're running, you know, we've been running an accelerator program as well for our companies, we actually brought them in as part of the selection process. So they really felt like they were part of the whole process from the start. And they felt like they were their startups. You know, we chose them, they're ours. You know, they were really invested, which I think has been super successful. You know, we did go even further. You know, we run a summit every year for our all of our investment of our investee companies and our wider stakeholders. And a few years ago, we actually did our champion awards, where we flew our champion of the year, and we flew them from the US to come hang out with us at Dubai Air Show, and that's something that just, you know, the cost of that versus what we got in return was huge, because such an influx of really, really talented you know, people from across the business, the cleverest people that we have in the company, super engaged and wanting to be a part of this. And I think as well, because of the visibility that our program gets within the company as well, you know, we get right to the C-suite level of engagement. That's the sort of engagement these people want across the business. So it was really a way just to get them engaged and get them bought in. What that has meant is that they have actually become some of our best salespeople for the portfolio, because they're out, they want to show off, they want to show this company that they find in the great work that they're doing. So that way of, you know, those small rewards and recognition has been hugely powerful in terms of us just being able to reach much further and do much more than the very small team that I have.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've got to congratulate you, because often people, you know, CVCs talk about how difficult it can be sometimes to do that sell in to the company.
I am very impressed. Very impressed.
Simple things, and I think that's what I think everyone's always looking for a really, you know, heavy lift, big, you know, big initiative, and actually, you know, just that small initiative of inviting people in and helping them feel part of a bigger group. And to be honest, let's face it, you know, those people, especially in those technical roles, they just want to play with cool stuff. And working in large organizations doesn't necessarily always allow you to do that as quickly as you would like to. So it allows them to scratch that itch of being involved in something really new and cool, and getting the kudos with, you know, helping support it as well.
Do you think it has
If I may ask?
Yeah, go.
How long is this program for them to onboard?
So us to onboard the champions, we literally do a 2-hour session with them, which is what we call our, you know, our champion training, and then we do regular kind of webinars and, you know, touch points through the year with them. So it's really not a huge lift at all, but it's that regular piece, and then we have an internal newsletter, you know, where we ask them to feed us back, you know, things that they're doing, or hosting portfolio companies at their site, or, you know, doing those sort of things, and then we, you know, we promote that across the business. So it's relatively low lift, but I think that it's that sort of thing that makes them really feel like part of our team.
Doxy, did I see you had your hand up? Have you got something similar? Were you interested in any notes?
No, I actually raised my hand by accident, but
Okay.
again, I really want to stress how difficult it is to really get the buy-in from the R&D people and people at the headquarters. I mean, normally these people are really busy, and they do want to explore new areas and new stuff, but you know, during day-to-day work, it's very challenging because they have a lot of deadlines to meet. So so it's really important to have a very strong team in the CVC, like the business development team, who will connect these companies to the right people and continue to nudge them to look into working with these companies and all that. So I think obviously there's no one way of doing it, but at least I really believe that a dedicated team is a must.
Yeah. And you were mentioning before that actually, you know, when it comes to that business development piece, you know, that's something that might be a tipping point for thinking about having, you know, teams in other geographies. But what's your thinking around the balance? Because on the one hand, a business development team, you know, it has to be quite close to the startups, so it would make sense for them to perhaps be located near where the startups are. But they also have to be pretty close to the business units, right, to get some of that work back in there. So how do you sort of balance those two needs? Like, what would you put your people in theory?
So you really need to bridge the gap. Obviously, there are multiple differences between a startup, let's say here in Silicon Valley, versus, you know, a business unit in Korea. There are the cultural differences, right? I mean, there's language barriers. There, you know, big company versus small company dynamic, and all that. So it's really hard. So you really need a business development team that understands both sides. So again, the way we do it is, we recruit the business development team from different business units in Korea, right? And these are people who are doing tech scouting, open innovation work. So they understand what kind of technologies the business units are looking for, and also they have a network and understand who are the key players in there and all that. And what I do that is now I bring them here to Silicon Valley, make them work side by side with my investment team, also meet the companies together to understand what's happening in Silicon Valley. So a lot of times, my investment team does a lot of educating of the new business development team guys who come here to help them understand how venture capital is done, how what the Silicon Valley culture is like, and how to work with startups. So after I guess a period of time, usually 6 months or more, then the people who came from Korea start to understand how things are done here, and they can now really go and take these startups and pitch to the right people in Korea, but at the same time know how to work with these startups.
So it's kind of like in a way, a little bit of that same principle of having the champions, except you have them kind of with you for those 6 months, and then they go back. What about you, Kendra? I'd love to hear a little bit about, again, there's a lot of interest in the questions that I've seen coming up in the Q&A function is around how, the business engagement, right? That's kind of one of these key issues at the moment. And business engagement with startups is tricky at the best of times. But I'm wondering, how do you think about it when you're taking something that's from, maybe again a very different culture, and then it's coming to, introduce that startup to work with, maybe a German engineering team and headquarters that might have a very different cultural touch points, cues, maybe not even as much of an understanding of the problems of that market where the startup, popped up from.
I mean, if I just maybe for that question stay on our piloting program, because it's probably a good angle to think about, like how do you actually get the business engaged, and how do you take a decision if you want to go beyond the pilot and adopt the solution, right? So the way we work right now is that our first port of call would always be discussing with the business what are the problems that you want to solve. And once we have the problem definition clear and we have a business case, we basically then go and scout the best startup. And the best startup here can be anywhere in the world. We don't have any regional or geographic limitations. And basically what we then do is to bring a short list of 10 companies to our business side, which we then talk them through and share with them what we know about the companies based on initial calls. And then together with the business, we pick the top 3 that we want to demo with. And so when you then go into the demo, obviously the business side is in there. There's a get to know, so people know each other, They get to know each other in that demo call. And then basically the business decides if they want to do the pilot, because it's basically based on their budget. We don't pay for pilots in the ventures team, because we believe if the business is not picking up the bill, the problem is not going to be big enough for them. So it's always very important for us that the business, puts skin in the game, and then basically also owns the relationship at the end of the day, because if you move beyond pilot into adoption, you need to have the business actually owning the relationship. And this is, I think, the point where we struggled with most in the last 2 years is, so you have a successful pilot, the business likes it, they want to adopt. Who now actually owns the adoption? And adoption here means across the company, right? It's easy to adopt like in that team where they piloted, but we think about adoption, if it works here, where else can we actually use this solution for? And how do we then roll it out? So what we have put in place is what we call an adoption owner community. So we basically have identified a few leaders in the company that have an interest in really owning this adoption across the company on behalf of the business. And that made a big difference for us, because all of a sudden you have somebody that has a reasonable standing in the company to actually have some of those implementation conversations. Yeah, so it's kind of regarded enough. And you also have somebody who feels responsible to actually do that. And so when you think about the question you had about So what happens when you have different cultures coming together in the pilot or in the adoption? I think the pilot was never an issue because you have the piloting team and the startup, they work together, they work through the pilot. And I think that's also something when we think about the success of the pilot, we don't only look for KPIs that are financial or like impact related, but there needs to be a cultural fit somehow as well, right? At the end of the day, you can't scale a partnership if people don't really work well with each other. And that's something the adoption owner will need to pick up and make sure that actually once we roll out, we build that continued bridge of relationships and so on. So that's how we've done it so far. I don't think we had ever a case where you had a cultural clash beyond. So I think we found out the cultural clashes before we decided to adopt so far.
Okay.
But then never say never, right? I mean, this is people working with each other, and you can work very well with one person, but maybe not so well with another person. And so that I think we need to have an eye on. So I'm curious if anybody else has experience on this, because we haven't had that yet. But,
yeah, I wonder, I mean,
yeah.
Nicola, what you look like you could jump in, because I imagine that sometimes introducing, I don't know, something as freewheeling as Starship, an Estonian company, to sort of maybe a more conservative Japanese C-suite might have been challenging. I don't know. How did you find it?
Well, I mean, you pick point on Starship. Starship was actually already engaging with one TDK team. And if you think about Starship as robots, that's the type of customers that many TDK teams across the world would want to either refine their roadmap for or sell components to. So for any of our portfolio companies that are more in the customer type, the potential future customers of TDK, and of course we have humanoid robots. We just, in agility robotics, we invested in one called Anybotics. That type of customers, the synergies are more quickly identified. But I actually echo what Kendra said, which is, and maybe I don't want to minimize it. Pilots are hard to get, but the end should be a global scaling. And I never thought about formalizing what you did, Kendra, which is this adoption owners. But I think I'm going to discuss that with the team, because at the end of the day, we want our portfolio companies and startups, even the ones we don't invest, to be very successful and to scale globally and to leverage TDK. And by doing that, TDK will do well as well. And I think one of the things you mentioned about skin of the game, the way I'm thinking is what we discuss in TDK Ventures, which is equal win. It has to be valuable on both sides so that it can first be sustainable over time, but also scale. And so I think back to your point, back to your question, I think the challenge are typically when we invest for an exploration mission that's really more into the long term, but we need to know because it might actually impact our roadmap. Photonics could be a good example where that could replace the need for passive components business of TDK. And so we need to have a sense, we know it will happen, but we need to have a better sense of when it could happen. Or for example, we invested in nuclear fusion with Type 1 Energy. And in this case, that was interesting because we invested for clearly strategic view, but also for contribution to society impact. But then we realized that we had one of the TDK team doing all the power supplies for power plants already, and Type 1 Energy could leverage all of what they had already and build a roadmap on top. So sometimes we get surprised. But the scaling the pilots, I think I'm taking that as a golden nugget today.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it, that perhaps, I'm not hearing too much about culture class. It's just this kind of the usual problems with kind of moving from that pilot to scale up stage. And that's
I want to say, I think, sorry, but on the cultural, I think if we recruit as a corporate VC diverse teams with diverse cultures, we should be able to be that liaison, to be that bridge between the different entrepreneurs and the corporations. And I have this sense that this is like an impedance match, or maybe a less engineering term would be a membrane with we need to make sure that we have a good osmosis between these very small startups that don't act the same as corporates, and so I think the recruitment of the team across geographies, across cultures is, I think, part of the superpower you need to build to be able to create these magical equal win partnerships.
Yeah. Now, there's a quick question here that I just wanted to throw out to all of you. There was
I think Nicola was going to say something.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I cut you off. Okay, no, let's go for that. Then I'll throw in my quick question.
What, just Nicola, as you were speaking, the thing that I think that is really important, and I've noticed within my team, is that your team, the CVC team itself, those individuals need to be really entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
Because I think that a lot of what we're doing and what helps bridge that, because there's no question there's a huge cultural divide between our startups, and our corporate colleagues. But what I think has been so successful with my team, particularly like my head of portfolio development, she's so entrepreneurial. She can go and work with those business unit teams who are frustrated because they want some of this technology and can't get around our own bureaucracy. So having our team to go in and help them unlock some of those things, take away some of that, it's just too hard piece. And I think that in order to do that, they need to be really resilient, really entrepreneurial. And I think know that they have top cover. I know, there's not a day that I don't wake up and I get a message from the team saying, you might hear about this. I've kind of upset someone or broken something, but I'll fix it. So knowing that they have that top cover to go and, be the agitator and break things and, push the boundaries a little bit, I think is really crucial to the overall CVC success in pulling through those pilots.
Yeah. Okay. Certain buccaneering spirit, definitely. So I had my quick question, because this was one that came up, was whether you, how many of you invest in kind of as LPs and other funds as a kind of soft landing into a new geography? Is that something, that's a good strategy? Do you do it? Not sure who wants to jump in first. Maybe I'll start with you, Dongsu. Do you
Yes, so I think when you're first entering a geography, that's a good way to accelerate deal flow and also understand how the particular geography works. I mean, we've done multiple LP investments, especially when you're first starting out, because we really, I was building the team and really need to accelerate deal flow, all that. But now we are more thesis driven, so there could be certain geographies that we don't have good coverage on. It's a lot easier to start with an LP investment in that particular geography. But some of the top VCs who are very active in that area, but also ones that do know how to work closely with the corporate investors and understand the needs of the corporate. So once you've selected the right partner, then they can really help you out.
Yeah. Okay. And is that something that anybody else kind of uses extensively or did in the beginning and then maybe kind of evolved to do less of? How do you work, Kendra? Do you do LP investments?
No, we haven't taken any LP positions yet. We may not in the future, but we have not really, for us, seen the value, and actually because we wanted to learn ourselves actually how to do this well in a corporate context. And I think learning for us meant we wanted to build ecosystem very intentionally. And we obviously are talking to many of the other funds, right? And we share deal flow and we build connections, but LP positions as such has not been part of our strategy so far.
Okay.
Yeah, I will echo the same. I think we had a very strong intent to learn ourselves, and the intention is to really go deep and build our own convictions from first principles. And we didn't want someone in between to do that. We wanted to have that direct connection with entrepreneurs who, by definition, are the one building the future. So if you want to really understand the future, you want to have as little filters in between. But I do acknowledge that for geographical reasons, like if we wanted to go to China, I could imagine an LP position making sense. Or I can also see the value for a deep expertise, which we have no ability to build and that we would need for some time. For example, quantum computing if we ever felt like our expertise is not enough, and this is something we need to really know a lot, maybe an LP position makes sense. But at that point, it's that versus I just recruit an expert that's going to be really, really good and not have that filter that I talked about earlier. So I think it's this trade-off. And then there is a tip maybe for the corporate VCs who are watching. Because our design doesn't have fund of fund, we only do direct investments. When we meet these VCs who ask if we can be an LP, I say, sorry, by design, we don't. And then every time within a second, say, that's fine, we can co-invest together. And I feel like we get the benefits without even have to discuss about LP. Well, I'm sure if I say, well, I'm not sure, let's discuss, it would be like months of long discussions about it.
Okay, this is a good tip. If you are being harassed by people asking you to be an LP, do this. You're nodding and laughing, Nick. I suspect that because you guys do quite a lot of your own accelerator activity and so on, that again, there's probably less need for you to be doing those sort of fund investments.
Yeah. So obviously there are a few small things that we've done in the US, very customer driven though, in that regard, but it's really not been part of our strategy and never has actually been part of the Boeing strategy, through all of our iterations of this, and it's for that same reason, is that really, it's really important to us to build that ecosystem ourselves, and to actually learn and really get deeply involved with the ecosystem and bring them as close to us as possible, because I think that's where we get the greatest value.
Yeah. Now this is, we can't have a globalization discussion without this question. So I'm going to prepare you. This is the controversial geopolitical part. But I would love to know, to the extent that you feel comfortable answering in a public forum. But I mean, how do you think that the fact that we are, it seems, in a more geopolitically fragmenting world, we're seeing, well, tariffs, I don't know, they're on today, off tomorrow, who knows, right? But how much is that going to affect, your sort of investment strategy? I mean, just in terms of the things that you might be looking at now, and whether when you're thinking about 6 months out, what would you, is it changing anything? I don't know. Well, why don't we stay with you, Nick, and any thoughts on how you play this?
Yeah, Maya's going to get me fired first. So, yeah, no, obviously it's a personal opinion, not a company mandate. But for me, I think that it actually solidifies my position. In that us investing outside the United States as a US-based company is really important, and it's really important that we build that technical capability globally, because we are a global company, and as I mentioned earlier, nearly 80% of our customers are outside the United States. So whatever comes, we need to be ready for it, and we need to have all of that technology in all of the places that we might need it, as those things roll out, because the world is so unpredictable and fragmented. So I actually think that, from my position, I don't necessarily think this is an awful scenario that we're in that regard. I think that it does provide us with a lot of opportunity to be more global, and to really focus all of us on spreading that, spreading the love much further than we are already, and really finding those teams and founders that we maybe weren't getting the attention that they perhaps should have in the past.
Yeah. Okay. So we might end up going, more global, more international. Right. Okay. Well, let's see. Who else wants to sort of have a career-ending potentially moment? I don't know. Kendra, shall I come to you? I mean, how are you thinking about an uncertain situation?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, the problems still remain the problems that need to be solved to move to a sustainable, affordable, and reliable energy system. And so for us, we kind of think about it like that things move around us, and there's uncertainty about all sorts of, I guess, capital stack discussions and policy discussions. But at the end of the day, the innovations that are needed to drive the energy transition will still need to be innovated and supported and incubated and financed and built. We are mainly investing in hard tech. So that means there's always been a risk in the technology and in the commercialization of it. So from the investment thesis, we stick to our position for the moment, because we feel we look at the right problems. So we look at storage solutions, we look at carbon capture and removal solutions, we look at clean power generation and at e-fuels. And so we feel that those will move regardless of where in the world. And so I hope that was not a career limiting answer.
No, I think it sounds very positive. I mean, we're all taking quite a a positive and hopeful view on it. But it's good to get a sounding. I mean, Dong-Soo, if I bring you in now, I mean, again, you're based in the US, and obviously there's huge pressure for a lot of projects to move to the US. I mean, again, does that kind of thing impact at all on how you think about where you're investing?
Obviously, we're very US centric for sure because we're based here, but we continue to invest worldwide despite all the geopolitical situations. Actually, in fact, earlier this week I was in Israel, meeting some companies there, and I mean, Israel is as vibrant as ever. I mean, the VCs were telling me that last year they were back to the normal pace despite the war and all that. So there's a lot of innovation going on, and I think you just got to navigate that and just try to invest and work with these companies.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll give you the last word on this, Nicola. But again, do you think it impacts? I mean, because we have to acknowledge, obviously, the stage at which you often start the investment is so far out that it maybe is not so much being caught up in these decisions about where factories should be built or not or whatever. But I guess at some point, in the scaling up phases, they might start to come into it. So again, I'm just thinking about how do you kind of think about that at this point, when you're first getting involved with the company?
I'm thinking of it. So there is a Japanese art called kintsugi, which is about repairing broken pottery with gold. And so you have challenges, something breaks, and then you make it even prettier with putting it back together. And today I was at Hello Tomorrow in Paris, where we talk about everything from the news on Northvolt, the tariff, everything that's happening. And I think when we started our decarbonization fund, we made it geographic. So it was North America because of regulation tailwinds, which now are headwinds in some ways, but actually decarbonization can be seen in many ways, the same solutions for grid resilience. So this is actually a very interesting topic we should discuss in a different panel. But I feel like for Europe, our investment thesis was the wake-up call of Europe and therefore entrepreneurs on the dependency on energy from Russia and being able to build the right solutions for Europe. And I feel like what's happening in 2025, at the beginning of 2025, is maybe the second wake-up for Europe. And that is going to create a lot of good innovation with amazing entrepreneurs. And that's where the news from Northvolt, to me, is unlocking of talents who are going to come from Northvolt and start companies and become the next Tesla mafia that we had in the US. And so, to use the Nokia example for Europe, where many startups came from Nokia because they had so much talent. And then your question about geopolitics is where I think when we make our investment thesis for any deep explorations we do, we think about what we know, what we don't know, what we believe. And this is where we capture where we think regulations could change, what could be the impact. We may be wrong, we may be right, but depending on these beliefs, we end up with a conclusion of where we want to invest, what KPIs we want to see for each startup. And so we take the geopolitics facts, and there are things we know about it, things we don't know, we can't predict, but there are also things we believe that will drive our investments. And some of our investments we've made in the past, like Peak Energy for sodium-ion batteries for grid storage, this was the right thing to do for decarbonization. This is the right thing to do for avoiding relying on supply of lithium, for example, into the US. So there's a lot of things which I think we have as investors to take contrarian views, and geopolitics is one of the inputs, and our belief system and our first principle should guide how we invest and where we don't invest.
Yeah, it's going back to, I guess, what Kendra says, that if you're solving the right problems, then, you know, it will eventually, it will kind of, the momentum of that will carry it through despite what may happen around you. I think we could have discussed this for much longer, but we are at the top of the hour, so I'm going to have to finish it here. But thank you everyone for who joined us.
Yeah.
I'm going to say a thank you to the panel. So Dong-Soo, Kendra, Nick, and Nicola, thank you so much for your time and your insights. Here is our panel who obviously are you know, still have you know, still navigating this, but have some good answers, and hopefully people got some key insights there that they can put into use. We've done this webinar in partnership with TDK, so a big thank you to TDK. It helps us be able to run these every month and help the corporate venturing community sort of, you know, do some of this learning and discussion about what are sometimes quite complex topics in these roles. And then we have a few other webinars coming up. So our next one is going to be about how CVCs can work with universities, university spinouts. So this is from lab to market. That's going to be in the beginning of April. So if you enjoy our webinars, do come for that, which will be a good one. And then we have a couple of events coming up. So these are some of the opportunities to connect in person with corporate investors, like our amazing panel that we've had today. But the GCVI Summit is next week in Monterey. That is our big one. And then we have various other GCV Connect events coming up in Madrid and Singapore. Our GCV Symposium in London and the Corporate Venture in Brazil are also very large in-person meetups. And then we have our program in Asia start kicking off in November with an event in Tokyo. So all things to look out for. And also, if you enjoy this kind of discussion about how to improve as a CVC investor, or you enjoy that kind of sharing of communal knowledge, I really would recommend our CVC investment programs, which are much more structured educational programs, usually a couple of days, which can be done in person or online, and where you can really dig into some of these topics. If you want to get in touch, these are our contact details. I'm always happy to hear from everyone. And that's it. Thank you very much, everyone, who joined us today. Thank you, panel. Thank you, audience. Have a great evening.